What's up, guys? Thomas Mott here. Welcome into the Thomas Mott Show and the Philly Special Show. Along with Josh Davis, we have breaking Philadelphia Eagles news. We need to jump in and dive into the fact that Philadelphia, not official yet, but Josh, it's as close to official as it possibly can be. They are expected to hire brand new defensive coordinator Vic Fangio shortly after he mutually parted ways with the Miami Dolphins, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. You see it up there on your screen. Again, they can't make this official, Josh, until they go through the Rooney Rule hires. They have to interview a couple of more defensive coordinators, but all signs are pointing to a 99% chance that this will be your newest Eagles defensive coordinator.
Yes, it is exciting and lots of different thoughts, I guess, whenever I first saw it, because you had the report of Adam Schefter. It's like it's expected to happen. The Josiah Anderson's going internally. There's strong speculation or almost
Right.
like it was official. So it started blowing up. So it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to actually do this thing. But you're right. It sounds like 99% chance, probably just a formality. And I mean, it's not a huge surprise. And shout out to everybody in the chat. We appreciate you guys joining. And curious to get to your thoughts, what you guys think about it, because this was going to happen last season. Like,
Yeah.
Jonathan Gannon is the one who screwed that for us, so it was going to happen. But now, I guess it's better late than never. But I don't know. Where are you at with this one?
At the very beginning, I thought I wanted something new. I wanted a new scheme change. Philadelphia's been searching for this Vic Fangio coaching disciple scheme for a very long time. I mean, Sean Desai is literally a Vic Fangio disciple, and he runs a very similar scheme to what Fangio has been doing, whether he was the head coach in Denver or most recently with the Miami Dolphins. But I guess if you go straight to the source and don't just get a disciple and get actually Vic Fangio, then there's a chance you could get maybe some better overall defensive play. Now, his scheme is slightly different than Desai's. Desai's very clearly a 4-3, even though he'll mix in some 3-4 looks there. Philadelphia now will most likely switch to an overall 3-4 as Desai's overall defensive scheme. And if he can come in here and maximize the most out of Nolan Smith, get the most out of Hassan Reddick, and Howie Roseman gets behind him and really emphasizes the linebacker position, there's a chance that you could go ahead and have a much more improved defense than where Philadelphia has been at the past couple of seasons. And it's not like he had a bad year with the Miami Dolphins. They weren't great. They dealt with a ton of injuries, but this clearly was the Eagles' top choice because, sure, they interviewed a couple of guys the past couple of days, but the absolute second Vic Fangio and the Miami Dolphins mutually agreed to part ways, which maybe indicates that Fangio wanted to come to Philadelphia. The Eagles delayed their joint press conference today between Roseman and Nick Sirianni, and they dove right in and basically have made this official without making it official because they can't for the next couple of days. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the players overall fit into the scheme and what the Eagles want to do defensively going forward. Because, Josh, you and I can talk about the offense all day long, and we obviously have over the past couple of weeks and months, and how terrible Sirianni's game plan and Brian Johnson's play calling have been. This defense was a major reason why Philadelphia struggled the final 7 games of the year. They couldn't stop anybody, including Baker and the Bucs in the Tampa Bay postseason game.
Yeah, it's all sides. You're right. The defense was terrible, atrocious, whatever you want to call it. Desai probably would have been better, but again, to what extent? If you kept in there, it was awful for the 49ers game. I mean, there's a reason that Sirianni felt like, hey, we got to make the change. Now, Patricia was again terrible, but yeah, you had to make some changes. And again, I see, people on the chat here too, just saying like Christian Romanello says, do not like this. Another defensive scheme the rest of the team had figured out by the second half of the season. I'm saying Ridge King, this is the same defense. Defense is overrated. I understand the thought on that, but again, it's like out of the candidates that we saw,
yeah,
you may think that there's a better candidate, but to me personally, I was like, I just don't feel like Sirianni and Howie and Lurie are going to go with any of those candidates. Like, this feels like, yep, that's what we would have expected, right? I mean, this is one of those that we know what Vic Fangio brings to the table. We know how much they love him and his scheme. At least, like you pointed out, I mean, you're going to get the Godfather in the sense of like, hey, that's his scheme, that's his defense. So you don't have to go with someone else who's running his form or his version of it. Maybe it works. He did have a ton of injuries that he dealt with in Miami. So, I get the point of like, oh, we scored 31 against them, wasn't able to shut us down, had some struggles, things like that. But if you can get guys bought in, and the hope would be that you can, he was here previously as a consultant, so it's not like he's totally unaware, and he loves Philly. I mean, that's a given. So maybe it works out. I think that there's some positives to it. I can understand some frustration or maybe some concern initially, but you look at the personnel, and it does bring up another good point too, like you talked about with the linebackers. You're very much, and I think even regardless if we had Vic Fangio, like everyone would say this, we needed to invest more in linebackers. Like, we got to get better. We have to have some playmakers there. If you're going to run this scheme, I mean, you got to have those playmakers. You got to have those linebackers. And so I'm curious will we see Howie Roseman invest in linebacker positions? Will we see him go, whether it's free agency, whether it's the draft? But yeah, if you're going to change it schematically and you're going to go to a 3-4, most likely that would be the idea. You're going to move some guys around, and maybe it works to your benefit, but it will be better. Again, it's to what extent. Hopefully so. I believe Fangio was 23rd in points per game. I actually didn't pull it up. I think he was like 23rd with Miami. But again, you have to remember, like, he was dealing with injuries. But since week 8, the Dolphins defense was 7th in success rate, 8th in EPA per play, and 20.4 points per game. So first half of the season, maybe not so great. It was the reverse of what we did, because the last half, the Miami was actually fairly decent. So again, I think that there's some promise there. Is it the best signing in the world? Maybe not. But again, like, who are you going to throw out there out of the candidates that we talked about? It felt like we're talking ourselves in and out of every single possible solution. Like, there's not a perfect alternative. So I don't know. I mean, I think it could be all right. It could work.
Well, and it's not like the Dolphins were necessarily a bad football team this year. They had a really good chance to be the number 1 seed, or at least close to the number 1 seed in the AFC, and the defense was a huge part of that. And the good thing about Fangio is he seems to have very similar likes and needs to what Philadelphia likes and needs going into this offseason. He's very big on cornerbacks. They made a big trade for Jalen Ramsey this offseason. Philadelphia seemingly needs to figure out what they're going to do at cornerback, and you're seeing some defensive line play on your screen here, including Christian Wilkins. They love a very strong defensive line, just like Howie Roseman does. Now, the question is going to be linebacker. How can they make either the linebackers on this roster, whether it's Zach Cunningham or Nakobe Dean, better, or how can they go out and improve the overall linebacker depth chart and sign people in free agency? You got to remember, Philadelphia is going to have 10 draft picks with 4 compensatory picks, probably $40 million in cap space. There's going to be a lot of available ammo to go get this defense to be exactly what Fangio wants. And the good thing about Vic Fangio is he's been all around the National Football League. I mean, he was obviously a coordinator with the Chicago Bears before being hired as a head coach with the Denver Broncos. Then he was our consultant during the playoff run. Then he goes to Miami during this 1-year stretch. He has a lot of relationships. He knows a lot of people. And I'm expecting him to get a lot of new faces on that defense in order to go ahead and make it as formidable as possible. Also, Josh, one thing we've got to make very clear, the best part of the Fangio hiring, I mean, take away scheme, take away personnel, take away his track record, the best part of this is he's not leaving next year for a head coaching job. He's had his head coaching opportunities. Philadelphia is going to have somebody who can come in here, dominate, be really good. You could have the number 1 defense next year, and Fangio likely will stay in Philadelphia because he's been there, done that from a head coaching standpoint, and he's up there in age. It's very similar to what Ron Rivera would have been, someone you and I both talked about on our shows as wanting to come to Philadelphia, mainly due to the fact that he has experience as a DC, as a head coach, relationship building, and he's not going to leave as soon as the greener pastures seem to pop up like a Jonathan Gannon did, or like Sean Desai would have done had Philadelphia been more successful on defense. That's a little bit of an overlooked plus of signing a guy and getting him like Vic Fangio.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. We need honestly, we need the lifers. We need just the people that are going to stick around, because like we've been saying, I mean, it's on both sides. And we can get to the offensive side here in a second too, because I'm curious on that, and I know everybody in the chat is as well. But like, it needs to be the exact same, because we talk about Sirianni and his scheme and philosophy and everything there. But yeah, like, good coordinators always get poached. They always get hired away, and that's the frustrating part. Is because if you do play well, most of the time those guys are gone. But with the situation here with Fangio, I'm totally in agreement. If you get it to work, if he can get the guys to play up to the standard, I hate to use that word because we see it all the time, but if they get it up to there, then all of a sudden, hey, you know what? This is looking pretty good. And you do have a couple playmakers. You've got some guys that if you put them in the right spots, I'm hopeful, and we're going to see this, I know, but I'm like, just in small spurts. Like, let's not see Hassan Reddick drop back too much. I know he's going to. I know that's a Fangio thing. Like, that will happen. So, but I'm already tempering a little bit of expectations to not be too frustrated whenever we see that. But if you can do it enough where it's like, hey, you know what? This is not throwing you in the middle of or coming out of nowhere, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, we haven't been doing this all season about. And then, Matt Patricia comes in the last 7, games of the season, Hassan Reddick's dropping back like what 20% of the time in coverage. Come on, we didn't do it all year. So if you get an offseason to prepare, Fangio can teach it. No one's going to teach the Fangio scheme better than Vic Fangio himself.
Right.
So you get the guys up to speed, and you're not making a change in the middle of the season. It's going to be better. But I don't know, what's the over under on like the draft picks that get used on the defense? Like, what's a healthy number to you that
High.
I mean, because we got to be
Over
happy
under
about
6 out of the 10. Yeah, and
if
how
they
he's
spend
going to make
less than that.
trades. It's got to be. And how he's going to make trades during the draft as well. I know people are mixed on this. I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat saying, don't care who you hire. We need players. I hate this hire, says KJG. Some people saying this is absolutely beautiful. Listen, we're not going to know until they actually get on the football field, but we do know what you're getting out of Vic Fangio and someone who has a track record of being impressive. Anybody Philadelphia was going out there and hiring has had their ups and downs. Even like a big name defensive guy from college, like a Minter from I think Michigan. Everyone wants Minter, right? He's this bright mind. He just dominated in the playoff. He obviously won a national championship game. There would still be detractors saying, well, prove it at the pro level. Like, prove it to me in the NFL. Is it some unproven guy? And the same will go for the offensive coordinator, whether they get Cliff Kingsbury or they hire the quarterback coach from Houston Texans, which we'll talk about. All these different things are, mum in terms of will they actually be good or not. We won't know till they get on the football field, but very clearly Howie Roseman and the Eagle organization have always liked Fangio. They always wanted Vic Fangio. Now they get him. They have a chance to have a guy stay for the long term and build the Eagle defense into what we always hoped it would be. It had flashes under Jonathan Gannon. They had a couple of good games early under Sean Desai, although you can argue that, the Miami game wasn't even that fantastic. But recently, at least the past 7 weeks, they couldn't stop anybody. And whether it's personnel, coaching, or a combination of the two, they have a fresh start here under Fangio once they make this official. And I'm excited to see what they're possibly able to do. Now, again, for those just joining us, we got to make it very, very clear. They can't officially hire Vic Fangio until they complete a couple of other coaching interviews. The Rooney Rule means you have to go ahead and interview 2 candidates with a diverse background. Philadelphia has not done that as of yet, at least out of that we know. They can interview people without telling us officially. But once that is done, it all seems likely that Philadelphia is going to go ahead and make Vic Fangio the newest defensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles. And this all comes, again, a little bit earlier here from ESPN's Adam Schefter, as seen up there on your screen, when he told everybody about 30 minutes ago that Fangio had mutually agreed to part ways with the Dolphins. Sources tell me and Jeremy Fowler Fangio will now be the top target for the Philadelphia Eagles to hire as a defensive coordinator, and a deal is expected. Miami's allowing Fangio to leave to be closer to his family in Pennsylvania. Fangio and the Eagles had an interest in working together in 2023, but the timing didn't work. This time it will. So seemingly very, very confident there that Fangio is going to go ahead and come back, and we are very excited, at least just from a news standpoint, to have the defensive coordinator search basically over, and now Philadelphia can work on the offensive coordinator search and getting the right players in position as we head towards the offseason and the start of the new league year in March. I'm curious where you're at on this overall press conference from Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman today. There was one big takeaway that we're all going to talk about tomorrow, and that is the fact that Nick Sirianni basically admitted the fact that he's going to give up the offense, and whoever the offensive coordinator is, it'll be that person's offense. And a lot of back and forth on whether it's Brian Johnson's offense or Nick Sirianni's offense this past year. It sounds like whoever they bring in, that it'll be their offense, and they will make some serious changes. They will do some serious internal reflection on what went wrong and try and fix the massive issues Philadelphia had offensively. And I know a lot of people are upset that Sirianni is not getting fired, including myself, I think including you as well. But if there was one good part to keeping Sirianni, you would have to convince me that the offense would not be his, and it seems like that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I'm holding out. I agree that yes, it needs to be a different offense. If you hear the presser, and again, we'll talk about it quite a bit, I'm sure, even in the coming days. But and also real quick too, I don't know if we mentioned, but Ryan Grieve, shout out for the $5 super chat, says not only am I not over the moon on Fangio, I don't want Sirianni either. Dude shouldn't be in charge of sea monkeys at this point. So there you go. That's probably, I don't know if I'm there with Fangio, but with Sirianni, yes, that's kind of the thought. You're right in the presser. For those that watched it, they already heard it. For those that didn't, I mean, he said the right thing in the sense of like, yes, the OC is going to be in charge of the offense. The DC is going to be in charge of the defense. And then he's asked, hey, well, what are you going to do? And he's like, well, I'm the head coach. I'm going to be head coaching, basically. It's like, okay, cool. Thanks. That sounds great. But what does that mean? Like, is that a legit thing that he's going to step back and he's literally going to say, hey, it's your offense, whoever the OC ends up being? that's the part where I'm skeptical, because we kind of heard some similarities. Now Sirianni did say it was my offense, and there's the person coming over is going to bring over his scheme. It's going to be our offense. He says it's going to be
Right.
ours. We're going to work together. But still, that to me is like, bro, that's too much involvement. Like, you need to step out and say it's his offense. It's whoever we hire. It's his offense. They're doing it. I'm not involved, and I just don't know that we're going to see that. So I'm just kind of, I guess, holding out, and he's got to prove it to me. We got to see that legit. It should be better, though. And again, it's like, okay, well then, candidate wise, who are we talking about? Because you've got a seasoned vet here for defensive coordinator, right? And so if you talk
Yeah.
about, we want to go with the same philosophy, hopefully, of a lifer, right? A guy who's not going to bounce around too quickly. Well, then, we obviously have reports of several different candidates or potential candidates, interviews. You got a Cliff Kingsbury. We both talked about it recently on our shows. If you didn't catch it, go check it out on our pages there. But we talked about Cliff Kingsbury. There's a Arthur Smith. There's a Gerard Johnson. But like, I mean, to me, okay, first off, Gerard Johnson, it feels like a just repeat of Brian Johnson.
It really does.
There's so many similarities there. It's not even funny. Like, don't even
Yeah.
entertain that. I think, hey, maybe he's going to be good eventually. We don't need let's try it out. We don't need a tryout session now with an OC. We need someone who's more proven. Cliff Kingsbury's interesting. Um, there's some pros and cons, again, to everybody. I think that to get the air raid and to get some creativity and his ability to help or possibly help Jalen to, convert against a blitz, that could work. That could be a benefit. And then there's Arthur Smith, but that it's like almost like vice versa, because then you're going to have, hey, I bet we have a strong run game, but what does the passing game look like? Can he get that going with
Yeah.
Jalen? And when would Sirianni even want that, right? And Lurie as well, because you say, well, we paid $255 to Jalen to just, run the ball a ton, which I'm fine with. If we want to just run the football 40 times, that I don't care, even though we paid him $255 million. But again, there's just so many questions. Do you have, and question for the chat too, we'll get to as many as we can, but do you have a favorite of OC? Or I guess two-part question. Does it change who you want your OC, for one, because it's Fangio? Because sometimes it's complimentary, right? Does it change who your favorite is, or is it still the same? Do you have someone in mind that would be your favorite right now?
I'm with you on wanting a proven play caller, right? The whole issue with Brian Johnson, even though he did call plays whenever he was with the Florida Gators and Kyle Trask, but come on, I want a proven NFL play caller. I want somebody who has shown to be successful, whether it's throwing the football, running the football, combination of the two. That's first off. I'm not as low on Cliff Kingsbury. I don't think he's going to waltz in here and just run the air raid and, run his Texas Tech offense or that kind of hybrid offense he ran whenever he had Kyler Murray with the Arizona Cardinals. I think that him and Nick Sirianni, and again, this is a big if, but I do believe that they could really make an interesting looking offense. And you got to believe that Cliff Kingsbury, since leaving the NFL, has been trying to get not only back in the NFL, but make his scheme successful in the NFL. And so I like the idea of Kingsbury. He's a young, offensive-minded head coach who has a lot of creativity. He has had a lot of success throwing the football, and Jalen Hurts, and he's worked with a bunch of quarterbacks and has really been high on Jalen Hurts even coming out of high school. He wanted to recruit him over to Texas Tech before Jalen Hurts inevitably went to Nick Saban and Alabama to start things off. But I do think Arthur Smith is very intriguing. I know people are going to say, well, Arthur Smith was terrible the past couple of seasons with the Atlanta Falcons. And I hear you. I mean, I live in Atlanta. Trust me, I covered Arthur Smith and went to Arthur Smith press conferences whenever I originally was working covering the Atlanta Falcons here in the ATL. But Arthur Smith is a great example of somebody like you can even make the argument of a Vic Fangio, a proven play caller who had a lot of success at the coordinator level, but not a lot at the head coach level. And when you go back to Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator on Mike Vrabel's Tennessee Titans a couple of years ago, his final season there, I think they were like number 2 in total offense. They were top 5 in a lot of major categories, and he had Ryan Tannehill dicing up defenses. And I love the idea of bringing in a guy like that. What we have to understand is there is not a perfect candidate. There is not somebody you could go out and hire right now whose name isn't Mike McDaniel or Sean McVay, who every Eagles fan would go, oh, great. Like, you hire Sean McVay right now, we all go, oh, we love him. They're all going to have issues. And most of the guys you're going to get are going to be either fired because they were former OCs or head coaches, or you're going to get an unproven guy. And I want a proven guy who's had some ups and downs, but can point to seasons where they said, look what I did with this offense. And to me, Arthur Smith can look back and say, look what I did with this offense a couple of years ago whenever he had Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, and the rest of the Tennessee Titans and got them very, very far during the regular season. He might be my leader out of the ones they've interviewed, but I do think that they're going to be looking around a lot closer at some other candidates as well, maybe some ones they haven't actually gone out and interviewed just yet.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised because as quickly as this one happened, it'll probably be the reverse of that for an offensive coordinator. Usually,
so.
Sirianni takes forever with his interviews. We know that from the offseason previously. It was like, what? I think like 12 interviews or something like that they said that he did for like a positional, I think. It wasn't even like one of the DC spots. So, yeah, they're going to tons of interviewing, figure out who that's going to be. I don't know. Rich King here says, I wouldn't be mad with Arthur Smith. And then Luis Gonzalez says, oh, I can't wait to see Seth Joyner's reaction. So that's going to be, yeah, it's quite a bit. Renegade Raider, I think I could deal with A. Smith. Yeah, I so far I'm probably in agreement. There's going Bieniemy is another name I know I could throw that out there.
We all would love Bieniemy. Yes,
hey,
yes.
that's a potential. But if he does well, he's off. Like he's gone. He's going to get a head coaching gig. That's not really a long-term solution, I don't think. Now,
right.
Hey, sure, if it's a short term that turns into a Super Bowl and he leaves, well, no one really cares as much because like, okay, whatever, we won a Super Bowl. But I don't know. You're also going to sit there and as frustrating as it was, and we said, hey, run the football. Let's get this physical team dominant. If Bieniemy is the head coach or the offensive coordinator, you're not going to run the football much. So.
Right.
That's why I'm kind of a little bit less on that. Again, I know that's one of the favorites for OC, but he if you go that route, you're going to be asking Jalen, and maybe he could turn things right. You have the position and the skill players to do that.
Yes.
But is that the best way to impose your will and to take advantage of what you could truly do with his offense and with the O-line? Because, regardless if Kelsey stays or goes, I think we all realize like you're still going to be fairly dominant, and you probably even draft a guy, whether it's going to be a slide into the right guard or just a backup for Lane Johnson, whatever, but you should still be pretty dominant in that role. And then all of a sudden, hey, okay, let's get the running game going. And the passing game would be even a lot more efficient because you're not having to rely on it so often. So I think that would be ideal. Again, question just becomes scheme-wise, which one do you want? Sirianni seems to, it's not a surprise because they love Vic Fangio anyway, but it's like Sirianni seems to enjoy or prefer let's not get beat like by the big play, right? Like let's make sure and keep everything in front of us. That feels like his philosophy, his scheme. And then on the other flip side, though, he wants the big plays. So it's like if you're looking at that from the offense versus the defense, it seems to be where he's probably, and I hope I'm wrong because he did say whoever comes in, it's going to be his scheme, but it feels like it's going to be someone that he brings in that's like, we want someone who can get those explosive plays back. With the lack of having it this season, we want to bring it back. We got the playmakers to do it. And so I'm curious because it'll see as we go through with the number of interviews. I wouldn't be surprised if this one, though, drags on, kind of like we've been talking about for a couple weeks with the OC job because of finalizing the defensive coordinator. But I'm curious, too, because Sirianni kind of hinted at it, and we've heard the rumors, and there's things that obviously got blown out of proportion with some of the Philly media, and, to not name names, but Britton Covey said things that he didn't say and twisted words and all this other stuff. But like Jalen still is going to have a heavy say in this because he's your franchise QB. And Sirianni, I would love to know because he's talking about Brian Johnson, the separation there, what happened. He didn't say a whole lot, but like reading between the lines, looking at his body language, they asked him, did you talk to Jalen? Did you discuss what was Jalen's reaction? And then he just, goes into kind of a PC like, well, whenever you lose a guy, everyone's upset, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Of course, he says, prior to that, like, Brian's the best ever. He's going to do great. We're going to miss him. It's going to be sorely missed. But yet you fired him. So nonetheless, that's another story. But still, when you're talking about that with Jalen, I'm curious if it was true, because the reports of the and speculation of Jalen and Brian Johnson being at odds, like not getting along and the relationship soured towards the end. Losing doesn't help anything. That amplifies all of it. But I would have to assume that in these, you're not maybe going to bring Jalen to an interview, but you probably question like, hey, here's a potential. What do you think? Where are you at headspace wise? Sirianni and Howie and Lurie are going to have the final say, but you probably want to get the buy-in there, especially if it is legit that he wasn't with Brian Johnson. They didn't see eye to eye, whatever that was. I don't know, but it's definitely a big component of it. So you got to factor that in too. Can Jalen, will he have a preference with a certain scheme or offense or what he does well? Because he needs help with a blitz. That's for
Yeah.
sure. But they didn't call plays. It's at least more than half the time where we just sat there and were like, they're not helping Jalen. There's nowhere for him to throw the ball. Now he's got to get better at checks, but hopefully there's a teacher, and maybe that comes down to positional coaches too. You get a different QB coach. As much as we might say Alex Tanney, like I don't know that it was incredible, like from but what we saw this season. So there's going to be lots of changes. I think we're going to see it over the next several weeks. I'm curious who they bring in. How familiar will this be? Because a familiar hire with the DC. Do you feel like we're going to get someone that Sirianni is very close with? That's what it feels like to me. But is that better or worse if it's familiar with Sirianni?
I think people will take it as worse, but it might be better just because you want somebody who's very familiar with Sirianni. If you want Sirianni to maybe be able to have a little more of a angel on his shoulder situation where he can kind of whisper in his ear and say, hey, let's fix this sort of thing. Remember, Shane Steichen was on Sirianni's, or with Sirianni on the Colts staff, or I should say back on the Chargers staff as well, but basically was very close with Sirianni, handpicked by Sirianni. It worked out very well. He took over play calling, took over the offense, and everything was great. The Eagles were, plays away from winning the Super Bowl. I think we have to at least acknowledge something. As frustrated as we are about the fact that, they're not firing Nick Sirianni and all the internal turmoil that apparently is leaking out of Philadelphia, whether you believe it or not, Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, they're not stupid, right? The Eagles are not a poorly run organization. I saw a stat on Twitter a couple of days ago. I think we're second most NFC Championship games since 2000 in the entire conference. Like, the Eagles are a very well-run organization. They've been considered that for decades, and they do know what they are doing most of the time. Now, they've had slip-ups, clearly Carson Wentz, obviously with Chip Kelly, but they're not stupid. And if you go back to the Jalen Hurts point here, if Hurts didn't like Nick Sirianni, if he hated Nick Sirianni, do you really think they would keep Nick Sirianni? Like, they just gave Jalen Hurts $255 million. Clearly, they needed somebody to go, and I'm sure they did consult with Jalen at some point, and Brian Johnson was eventually the odd man out. Now, Sirianni might lose a little bit of offensive control, which in the end is going to be a good thing. This whole idea, though, that Sirianni now is a lame duck coach who doesn't do anything, well, what does Dan Campbell do? He doesn't call offense or defensive plays, right? I mean,
Right.
There's a couple of what does Jim Harbaugh do for the Baltimore Ravens? He doesn't call offensive or defensive plays. Like, what is he? There is a formula for success if you have the right coordinators in place. And Philadelphia, seemingly today, with the hiring, or the potential, or I should say, coming hiring of Vic Fangio, is the first step towards getting proper people in the proper place who can whisper the right thing to Nick Sirianni and make sure this football team is led from the top down, but also inside coaching rooms, inside coordinator rooms, and inside player meetings as well. Remember, Vic Fangio is a former head coach. Vic Fangio hopefully will be mentor to Nick Sirianni, a crutch to lean on, whatever you want to call it. I think having someone like that in on DC makes a big difference, and I think that's probably where they will go offensively, whether it's Frank Reich or whether it's another one of these more established names like an Arthur Smith, in order to mold around Nick Sirianni a staff that can go ahead and push him to be the best possible head coach he can be.
That is what I'm hoping for. I hope that we were saying that he's a CEO head coach of sorts. Just step back, let everybody handle it.
Who knows?
You're right though, because again, 30 million. What is it? 30 million, 35 million for Sirianni's contract versus 255 for Jalen. If Lurie, it comes down to push comes to shove, Lurie's going, hey, Jalen, you don't really like Sirianni. Okay, Sirianni's gone. There's no question. So, it's hopefully we do see the change in the difference. But again, it's like all of us have lived. I mean, seeing the comments here in the chat, but all of us have lived this for so long. The last 7-8 weeks of changes happening. We're going to have things fixed, blah, 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 blah. It's lip service at this point. So I know that's an incredibly long off season until we get to the regular season to prove it. But sadly, I don't care. I'm excited, and shout out to Kubici, who said, honestly, I'm ready for the offseason and draft. Yes, we're going to have tons of offseason coverage, draft coverage. Thomas and I are going to be live for that. So come hang out. We're going to give some stuff away, have a blast. But yeah, no matter what, even if you tell me they get A+ draft, best ideal coordinators, this team's humming, incredible reports throughout training camp. I don't care. I'm going to have to see it for probably first couple games to be proven that all right, hey, this is fixed now. We actually do have a difference, and the vibes are different because I've seen it on several of my shows. You've probably seen it on the same, but the vibes, no doubt we can feel were different, but how often do we look back? I know that winning changes it, but even like when we were winning this season, it was so hard. It was so like, oh my gosh, it's just utter relief. There was not a lot of enjoyment and, like the dancing, joking, laughing around that we saw 2 seasons ago, where the Super Bowl run of Jalen's loose, the team is loose, they're playing free. It
Yeah.
just felt like, oh my gosh, there's the weight of the shoulder, weight of the world on their shoulders, and it just keeps amplifying the later that you get into the season. So again, there's lots to be proven. Maybe it's better that they're in a semi way kind of underdogs. I mean, Philly's not going to go in with the talent that we have and, people being like, oh, they're not going to make playoffs, I don't think. But it's not going to be, oh man, they're the favorite to get back to the Super Bowl or get to the Super Bowl. It's going to be a little bit more under the radar. And I think that's a great place to be. So hopefully they can come up with the answers. It does start though, obviously with the free agency period, with the draft. Free agency wise is going to be interesting too. Again, we've talked about it. Offensively, you should have your core intact. So there's not a whole lot in my mind that I'm thinking like, oh, we need to, solidify. We got to go after some spots or positions or whatever. But a defense, I mean, that's huge. Like there's so much there that I mean, you can just name any position basically and be like, oh, hey, let's see, can we get that position? Can we get one of these? Howie was talking about it, kind of sharing offseason plan, thoughts, kind of alluding to the fact, naturally that, hey, when there's some misses, like it amplifies my side. Like I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to, he even used the reference. He's like, I'm trying to be to a standard or something like that. So it's all in the building. Everyone says standard now, but he's trying to get better and learn from it. Do you think that there's an overcorrection? And I guess it could be a good way. That's a negative connotation maybe, but like an overcorrection to, let's say like the linebacker especially, but like positions that he hasn't valued as much, whether it's free agency or draft. Do you feel like that he's going to do that in one off season?
I mean, it depends on what overcorrection is. I think an overcorrection would be going out and finding the most expensive linebacker in the free agent market, a Roquan Smith, or sorry, I guess Patrick Queen is probably one of the top ones in there. I got to look at the full-on list, but going for the most expensive inside linebacker and giving him the absolute bag, which is $15 to $20 million a year, and saying, here you go, Eagle fans, here's your linebacker. That to me is an overcorrection. An overcorrection of spending your third-round draft pick or a second round, you have two of them, draft picks on a linebacker, wouldn't be that big of an overcorrection. It'd be a little bit of a change from the norm from what Howie Roseman has done in the past, not emphasizing linebacker, especially in the draft, although he did take Jordan Hicks in the third round. He took Nakobe Dean in the third round. I mean, he has drafted linebackers inside the top 5 rounds, just not necessarily as consistently as Eagle fans would like. But I do think that they are going to focus more in on the defense than the offense this year. You mentioned it earlier. Who's leaving offensively, right? You have Jalen Hurts, you have A.J. Brown, you have Devontae Smith. You have basically the entire starting offensive line. Tyler Steen will slide in at right guard. Juergens will go over to center. We all know Jason Kelce will retire. No, he hasn't officially announced it yet. My expectation is he will announce that with Travis Kelce whenever that goes ahead and, whenever the Chiefs season ends. I think they're going to go out together. Michelle Tafoya hinted at that on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. But offensively, besides DeAndre Swift and probably Julio Jones and Quez Watkins, like the core is all there. Dallas Goedert's still going to be there. And they'll add a running back at some point, whether it's Swift, keeping him or somebody else. But defensively, they need more pass rushers. That's very clear, whether BG comes back or not. They obviously need linebackers. You will have a new cornerback. I expect them to be very active in that standpoint. And if you wanted an offseason where safety could be addressed, this is your offseason. There's a bunch of safeties in free agency that you could go ahead and grab at any point once the new league year starts somewhere in early March. And so I think Philadelphia makes a couple of splashes. Think of a Jalen Johnson, the cornerback from the Chicago Bears, as being an option there. Think of Antoine Winfield, the safety for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's another option there. I think they're going to make a lot of splashes that are more so on the defensive side of the football. Give Vic Fangio all these pieces and say, Vic, you've done this for a living for over a decade. Give us a top 10 defense. If the Eagles have a top 10 defense and a competent offensive coordinator, not even an elite offensive coordinator, a competent offensive system, this is still a stacked roster that can win not only the NFC East, but games in the postseason. I mean, we saw that this year with a bad defensive roster and an incompetent offensive game plan. The first 11 weeks of the year, they were probably the best team in the NFL. So it can definitely be done. There's a long way to go, but I do think that they have pieces in the right spot, and now we just have to simply sit back and wait for the OC decision. By the time we get that, the season will probably be over in terms of the rest of the playoff teams, and you'll be days, weeks away from the new league year when they can start signing people and really go ahead and give us a glimpse of what this roster is going to look like.
It's really awful, the fact that we didn't get to win or even host a playoff game, because
it is.
You talked about it, yes, like the feeling of we can get back to that spot, but like we were there obviously at the Dolphins game when we,
Mm-hmm.
ironically enough, when they played Vic Fangio and them. But at that moment, like we're walking out of there going, hey, there's some minor flaws. You got to get some small things fixed. But they
Sure.
played a really good game against Miami. So we're like, hey, you right the ship. This is good. This is the track that you want to be on. And we even said to ourselves at that point, it's like, we're coming back. Like, we're coming back. We're going to go to playoff game, whenever it is, whether it's divisional round, NFC championship, whatever, And as great as it was last season against San Francisco, it's the ultimate, like, just disappointment, the way that it ended, the fact that there's not even a hosting of a playoff game. But you're right. The core is there. You can get some things fixed. I'm optimistic from that side. It's just, it feels so, terrible because naturally you got to wait for forever. Michael H here says Quez staying ? No, that's no. Quez is not. That is the first part. That's the first part. Quez is not staying. We don't want Quez. And then Thomas, you said about DeAndre Swift. It's so unlikely that Howie, like,
Very
I
unlikely.
can't see where he's going to sign, but he needs to. I would love to see Swift come back the way they used him. And honestly, they didn't even take advantage fully, or as they could have, but it just, I feel like he's probably going to get a little bit more than what Howie wants to go with. Even if Howie was thinking about it, he may not even be. He may just be like, yep, that's good. It worked. But it to me would work really well to just, hey, you know what? He was fine. He knows this group, the squad. You got the chemistry. Him, Kenny Gainwell, keep things the same. If not, I mean, yeah, you could probably find somebody in maybe free agency or a late round draft pick or something like that. But I would love to see him stay. And then again, you're talking about just with the defense and kind of shoring that up. There's a lot of options. There's several draft picks. You had the three fifth round compensatory, 1/3. There's lots of reasons to be optimistic. It's just going to take forever. Brian Schmidt, though, here says, I'm sick of a bend but don't break defense. Hoping Fangio is a good hire, but we will have to see. Defense as a whole needs some serious coaching heading into next season. Please, Howie, get us some linebackers. Yeah, that's where, it's kind of, hopefully it's not too much of a bend but don't break. That's somewhat of a Fangio philosophy there, but we need linebackers. I'll agree with you there. We definitely need those. David Carpenter says we better get some cornerbacks, 2 starters as well. Where are you at with that? Do you think Slay? Do you think he's going to be? He was. I mean, honestly, he was solid compared to what we had out there. But do you think that for one more season he can be solid enough? Bradbury's not. Bradbury's not the answer for sure. But like, do you think he's the one starter, even if he's not your dominant starter anymore? Maybe, let's say he's CB2 in a sense. But like, does he have one more?
I think he does. I mean, I think I said this a year ago. It's no longer big play Slay, no longer elite play Slay. That basically ended after the 2023 season. He was not nowhere near being that elite in 2024. He was Pro Bowler last season, but he still is a very good player. And I think he will obviously, with the contract, stay in Philadelphia. I think what Philadelphia does at defense is they go make one big splash at cornerback and one big splash at either linebacker or safety, and whatever they don't get out of those two, they're going to spend a high draft pick on. So if you get a linebacker in free agency, you get a safety early on in the draft. If you get a safety in free agency, you get a linebacker earlier on in the draft. And if I told you right now, Josh, that they would get Jalen Johnson, the cornerback of the Chicago Bears, and then they draft a linebacker, let's say Jeremiah Trotter Jr., we always hear that name in the first 2 rounds, along with Vic Fangio, I think we would all agree the defense would be better than it was in 2023, right? It's very simple. It'd be better than it was in 2023. For sure. And so that's just a couple of moves. I mean, that's just 2 moves. One cost you money in free agency. One cost you a second-round draft pick. You have another one because you have 2 of them this year, thanks to the Saints. And then, boom, the defense is better than it was. You don't need a top 5 defense in the NFL to win football games. We saw that. Philadelphia, you go back to 2023, they weren't a top 5 in every major category, but they were a bend but don't break. They got a lot of pressure and forced turnovers, and the 2 things that the Eagles didn't do this year was force turnovers and get pressure. If you can do that, even if you don't like a bend but don't break scheme, you're going to win a lot more games than Philadelphia did this past season when they still went ahead and won 11. Adam1457 says, we bring back Oz. Thoughts on bringing in Jair Alexander. Again, another option at cornerback with Jalen Johnson. Alexander up there as well. He's probably leaving, obviously, the Green Bay Packers this offseason. Oz is hit or miss. It doesn't really matter. I don't think they will. I think they'll just go ahead and get someone cheap as a 4 fifth-round draft picks. You just get somebody in the 5th round. Because, again, what did Oz really do besides have one good game against the Bucs in Week 3? I mean, really, he was very quiet the rest of the way.
Well, and the clutch catch against the Bills. But
sure,
you're right. I mean,
it's
kind of like a handful of catches, and that's about it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's not a game breaker. He's a good player. He did his job very, very well. We appreciate him, but I doubt he's going to go ahead and come back. And as you see in the chat here, just to finish up the defensive thought, we still have Isaiah Rodgers, says Dakota Rupert. Exactly. That's another cornerback who can finish and really hold down the slot. Extremely fast, really good movement laterally, and he could be a much more, hopefully, healthier and bigger option than what Avonte Maddox has done the past couple of years. So I think that Fangio can definitely make this defense a lot better.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's I guess you could almost insert anybody and say they're going to be better. But yes, to the extent of Vic Fangio's coming in here, it's the scheme that you were kind of hoping for, even with the Desai hiring. So you're going to get the mastermind himself. You're going to have these players be able to hopefully run it and teach it to them, and you'll have an entire offseason. So it will be better. I guess there's, naturally some thought or some question on that. So Ryan Vine says a new DC, regardless who we get, isn't going to fix personnel. Personnel can be better. But
sure.
like you talked about, Philly Jake here says draft. This is a great idea. Draft Jeremiah Trotter's son. We already said that. Get that boy in there and bring Jim Johnson back from the grave. Well, I don't know exactly how we do that one, but I'm in favor of getting Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Honestly, even as good as like he is, this is probably like a terrible, just like from it doesn't matter. It's not going to make it better in a sense, but just to see Trotter on the back of Midnight Green again, like that would be pretty sick to be able to see that. So
I agree. Although there are plenty of good linebackers in the draft.
For sure.
Jeremiah Trotter Jr. You're going to be okay. I mean, Eagle fans get very locked in on one or two players in a draft. I mean, you don't get them. It's like all hell breaks loose, but there are still plenty of still plenty of good players there.
Draft 5 or what we're doing last season with Bijan.
Let's at least mention Covey responding to Jalen Hurts' comments. I know you talked about that on your show today. I talked about it on mine today. There's been a lot of reporting coming out of the bigger news media sources, especially the Philadelphia Inquirer, really pointing to dysfunction inside the Eagles. And the Eagles team are trying to push back on that. And you didn't see the one where Covey basically said, or it was taken as if Covey said Hurts is scary and unapproachable and he didn't want to talk to him. And then Jacob Media ran with that one as they tend to do. And then Covey came back and said not true at all and met a good response there. To me, there's a couple of things. First off, welcome to the world of the modern media, especially legacy media, because they're desperate for clicks right now, and anything and everything during the offseason especially is designed around clicks, and they have got to generate as much clicks as possible, whether you're a newspaper or whether you're a YouTube channel or you're an online website, whatever. This is going to happen a lot the next couple of weeks, but I don't think it's all wrong. In fact, there was no dysfunction in Philadelphia. There clearly was. I mean, there clearly were moments this offseason or this season where there were issues, whether they admitted it or not. You saw it on the sideline with A.J. Brown. Despite the fact they tried to, admit that it wasn't any sort of issue, there clearly was a little bit of drama there. But trying to kind of spin things up and make this whole idea that the Eagles are imploding and the Eagles all hate each other and Jalen sucks as a leader is just a little bit much for me. I'm curious what you took from Covey responding to what was originally the Inquirer's article and then run with by Jacob Media.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you. It's one of those that, I joked about it and kind of made a play about it, in the show early today that I posted, but like getting asked about it too, I get it because you see it and you're like, oh my gosh, Jalen's unapproachable. He's scary. He's whatever. Look, I think all of us would admit Jalen's not a warm and fuzzy dude. Like he's not a huge boisterous personality. He's not BG. Like there's huge differences, very, very different whenever you're looking at or watching interviews, seeing them in person, whatever. So, and that's fine. He doesn't have to be that. But at the same time, the vast majority, because I even posted a question, the vast majority of, hey, do you think this is legit? Whatever. Immediately we're like, nah, this is probably twisted words, taken out of context, whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's the sad part and the difficult. And that's why both of us in our shows, we try to, as much as we can, anytime there's press conference, there's actual footage to play it, because not only does like context matter, but the tone and everything else, because all of a sudden you look at a quote and you say it one way versus how the guy actually meant it. And you're like, you got to be kidding me. So you got to backtrack and go through everything. Unfortunately, the only thing that we had to go off of was Barrett Brooks reading like the verbiage of it. And so we're like, well, still, that doesn't tell me anything. And honestly, it made it feel like it was more legit though, because he's reading it. So you're like, you're going on a show, you're reading it to us. Mm-hmm. So like, as much as I don't want to believe that, you're like dying on this hill here to say that Britton Covey called out his quarterback and said that he's scary, like that he's unapproachable. That to me was crazy. again, I'm glad and happy that Britton Covey called it out and went back on Twitter and said, like, that's not true. That's not what I was saying. Took it out of context. And that part is still more believable. But, yes, is there a little bit of a dysfunction in the locker room? I think we can all see that. There's some things there. I think that there's still the belief in Jalen Hurts. I think that we've heard it
Of
from a
course.
number of guys on the team. But, Jalen is one of those that's I don't, and this is, speculation, not knowing him obviously personally, but just from what we see and hear, it is probably a little bit more of a quiet strength, and that's fine. Like, he could be
Sure.
a lead by example type of guy. We've seen a couple speeches from him. They do, they posted the Eagles channel. He can be a vocal leader. Like, he has great things to say, and especially when like mic'd up Jalen versus what we see at the podium is drastically different. Like, man, who is
Yeah.
that dude? So he's got a personality and a different side to him that a lot of us don't get to see, unfortunately. But I think that it's sad and ridiculous, and we are going to continue to have things that break as
Big
far
time.
as players kind of
Big
slipping
time.
stuff to the media, or I didn't believe in this,
Mm-hmm.
or hey, Matt Patricia lost his mind, he snapped his pencil and started yelling at whatever, like something happened. But we're going to get those stories. I just think that it's important as we're continuing to go through it, is like, let's not get wild and crazy about it, because losing, as with everything else, I think for people that have played sports or just competitive in general, it's like you can get emotional. Like, we've seen all that. But the
Yeah.
talk of like AJ Brown is going to be traded. AJ Brown wants to request a trade. He's sick. He's sick of Philly. He's fed up with him. He's headed out. All the players at odds with one another, the coaching staff and everything else. It's like, there's so many things that we could talk about with that group, but that's one of the last things as far as, Jalen and AJ, their relationship, what they want to accomplish. They take a few days or weeks or whatever, just decompress, be like, all right, we're good. Let's reset. Let's get going, throughout the off season, be
Yeah.
ready for next year. But I agree. It's one of those that just, as best you can, unless it's kind of a straight on interview from the person himself, it's hard to know, especially in this day and age, because then you sit there and go like, did he actually say that? Was like that the legit tone, if we can do it. So again, that's why if we get the actual video footage, we include them in our videos. Sometimes, unfortunately, we just have to go with, like, well, here's the quote. Is it true? Do we not? And
Right.
I know that both of us in our videos, you do a great job of it too, of like, here's the quote. Do you believe it? Here's maybe one side,
Yeah.
here's the other side, and then we just kind of go with it on that. But yeah, I think it was ridiculous. But I'm glad that Covey spoke up.
Well, and listen, we can pat ourselves on the back a little bit here, but we try our best, as Josh just said, to be honest. But the offseason is full of rumors. There are a ton of rumors. And everything that we talk about is always going to be sourced as we do on our shows. We're going to have the quotes as best that we can. But it's a big reason why I think both of our shows, again, are watched by so many people, is that we try to weed through all the garbage that is out there in terms of big media, little media, content creation, whatever it is, and give you guys the best Eagle coverage that we can. And so if you guys want to continue to follow that and subscribe, hit the red subscribe button for both channels. We'd appreciate that. And we're rocking all off season long, as we've done, or at least I've done. Josh now getting started on his channel as well. And so we appreciate you guys supporting us with all the views and all the thumbs up and the subs. And we're going to try to wade through what's going to be an interesting offseason. But in terms of the bow on internal turmoil, every team has internal turmoil who doesn't win a Super Bowl, right? If you win a Super Bowl, there's very little talk about how, oh, well, Mahomes won a Super Bowl, but deep down inside the locker room, they're all big mad. But if you lose, as 31 teams do every single year, then there's going to be people who leak stuff. There's going to be people who are upset, and you can't make a full 53-man roster plus practice squad happy 24/7. And so Philadelphia, last season, great example. Very little turmoil. No reports of it. Was there actually internally? Who knows? They were winning, and that's all that mattered. This year, they're winning 10-1. No negative articles. The Eagles are just fine. Then they start to lose. Then the negative articles come. It's just how it works. It's not just Philadelphia, despite the fact the media here is a little more polarizing than other markets, say Arizona or Jacksonville. But it's the same for every single team. You watch it happen in Buffalo after their loss. I basically had the buzzer with a missed field goal by Tyler Bass against the Kansas City Chiefs last week. Now this whole question of Josh Allen and the head coach. It happens everywhere, but Philadelphia is a little bit more unique, and that's why channels like this are possible to give you guys a little bit more, I would say, the truth and a little bit better coverage overall. But I'll stop patting ourselves on the back there and move on for the final portion of our show. By the way, this is going to be... Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I got to shout out Larry Love real quick. So Larry, appreciate the 10 bomb. I skipped over the super chat and kind of got lost on a tangent. But he says here, I'm tired of this bend over and give it up scheme. We need that asshole Greg Williams, because he's all about the art of the tackle. I can
So
understand
much for
some of
that.
this, but like, okay, this is the dude that also, the bounty gate. Like, so there's sides. I understand the aggression, and I did a show about it. We've
Sure.
all talked about it because there's so many rumors, like
Sure.
you're mentioning with the offseason. And it's hard to know, like, is this legit? Is this just kind of, hey, someone's linked to so and so? I'm with you, Larry. Like, we need some physicality. Like, there's
Yeah.
without question, you need dudes that are going to be physical, that are going to get up in your face. I've said it so many times. Like, I'm fine with some extracurricular activity from after what we saw this season. I know that that's maybe a stupid thing to say because 15-yard penalty cost you the game. True, but like what we saw, I mean, it would be a breath of fresh air to be like, yeah, okay, you got some guys that want to get it. It's passionate out here, but we didn't see it, and so maybe let's actually get some guys on the field that can be physical. It seems like you're going to have that. I guess the question too, and maybe a follow up to it is, if we're going to see a change on the defense, and who knows, like Fletcher Cox, he might not be coming back. You'd have to
Yeah.
rework something anyway. But like, is he gonna leave? Is he gonna return to Philly? Is he gonna be out altogether? Is he gonna end up retiring? BG,
Right.
it'll be the farewell tour. I would assume that they're gonna get something done, but he wants to come back. But it's a little bit of a changing of the guard. And I mean, I don't know that we necessarily had this season. You could say Fletch kind of, but like,
Yeah.
who's that voice going to be on the defense? Yeah, like I think on that side, it's like doubly effective or important to get a linebacker in my mind, because you
Yeah.
don't really, if I'm thinking about it, you don't have a voice on that defense. You could kind of say like BG, but BG's not to me as much of like a, we're going to get this team fired up as he is just like a happy
Right.
juice energy, which is cool. But like, where's the voice? Where's the dude that's going to say, like, we're getting in your face and you're going to feel us today? As much as Sean Desai said, you're going to feel this Philadelphia Eagles defense. Well, we felt it right out the door. But I'm serious. Like, where's that guy going to come from? He's not on this roster right now. In
Yeah.
my mind, he's not. Yeah. So it's a question, who's going to wear the green dot? Who's going to be that guy? I hope that you can either sign someone free agency, or it's probably too much to ask regardless of who you draft, even if it's Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I don't know if you're like, oh, cool. Hey, rookie's going to
Yeah,
lead us
not a
from,
rookie.
day one. So I think it's important. I think for a statement on this defense, look for Howie Roseman to sign that guy, whoever that vocal leader could be. And I'm curious to on that side. But I agree. And sorry, Larry, for being late on that super chat. But yes, I agree with you. It needs to be more physical, without a doubt.
There you go. All right. Well, we got plenty more coverage happening, obviously, tomorrow and later on this week and the rest of the offseason. The NFL offseason is never truly here, because as soon as we get through the Super Bowl week, then you're going to have, the finalization of rosters, and then you get to, obviously, the new league year, and then draft starts, and we're going to be super hard during the draft, the best coverage you can possibly find, and then you're going to get into OTAs, and then training camp. It's going to be a really fun offseason, so be sure to ride with us here every single day as we cover the Philadelphia Eagles for you guys on both of our channels. We're going to go and wrap up at right now. We're almost to an hour. This is going to count as our Wednesday link live. For those of you who are normally here on a Wednesday night, we're jumping on early. We just finished it, and we're not going to be on at 7:30 as we normally are, but we will be at probably our normal time next week, barring crazy, news updates like this one. So let's get a Larry Love super chat, though. We just threw it in here. What do you guys talk on practice? I go back to Hargrave comments. It sticks here. You think Nick's too soft on the guys? I don't. We didn't talk about practice being an issue 2 years ago, whenever Hargrave was on the Philadelphia Eagles. They went to the Super Bowl, right? I mean, this whole idea that you have to have the hardest practice in the world in order to be a good football team, to me, is a little ridiculous. It's hit or miss. Andy Reid's even dialed back his practices from where they were back in the old, Lincoln Financial Field NovaCare Complex days, or should I say, back when they went to Lehigh University days in Philadelphia. So
True.
I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it.
I agree. I'm not too worried about it as much as there. Who knows? Maybe it's a little bit less intense. To me, I feel like the lower levels, like high school, junior high, whatever, like coaches make the practice. But personally, I'm thinking these dudes are professionals. Like, your leaders, and kind of just like we were referencing, you don't have that vocal leader. You don't have the guy who's going to say, let's get after it.
Yeah.
I think that's what made the difference. You had a TJ Edwards, you had a Kaiser White, you had a CJ Gardner Johnson, you had a Javon Hargrave. Like, you had all of those guys, those vets, to be able to be like, oh yeah, we're practicing. And even if the practice isn't super intense, it doesn't matter, because we can bring it on game day. But you had so much of a shift, and too many guys leave, and rookies come in, and young players having to get into position and figure out new roles, and obviously lacking confidence in general in the defense. So I think you lack so much with that physicality, and that's why you didn't see it as much. The hope is, again, you bring in some guys, maybe some veteran presence, and or just some dudes that love to hit and be physical, that you change that morale, or you change that practice. But because this is a younger group, It's possible. I mean, I could see it
Yeah.
slightly where it's like, hey, maybe Sirianni does need to insert himself a little bit more than in the past. It was run a little bit easier. It's I mean, thinking back to like it's a basketball reference, I guess, but like Coach K had the shape the gym terminology, and it's essentially like before he even shows up to practice, the Duke players had to just have practice running like high intensity. Like he comes walking in,
Right.
they're already going through drills, they're already doing everything else. So that's kind of how it feels like when you're in a professional, I would assume when you're in a professional setting, like these dudes know what to do. They know the level of intensity that they got to bring. But, if you have so many differences in rookies, possibly Sirianni needs to step up and get it motivated more so. I don't know. But as Philly Jake says, we talking about practice
Yeah.
again?
Not really.
Yeah,
Not
we're
really.
talking about
But that's
practice.
the next thing we have to look forward to is practice. So, all right, we're going to wrap things up here as Vic Fangio will most likely be officially announced in the coming days. But that seems to be the trend here as everyone's reporting, including Adam Schefter, that it will happen. And we'll keep an eye on those OC interviews and changes that are going to get figured out sooner rather than later. We'll see. For Josh Davis
Yes.
and Thomas Mott, we sign off. We'll see you guys in the next one.
We'll see you.